Thank you for your patience. I understand we had some audio challenges. It's an honor to join you here today on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Thank you for your interest in this important issue for our province. I'd like to begin by thanking Commissioner Cullen and his dedicated team for delivering the final report of the Commission of Inquiry into Money Laundering in British Columbia. The Commission spent years working on this very significant report. They clearly took their work very seriously, hearing from the public, experts, and those involved in anti-money laundering work in the province, nationally and internationally.
Is it back?
Hello? Hello? Okay, great. The Commission spent years working on this very significant report. They clearly took their work very seriously, hearing from the public, experts, and those involved in anti-money laundering work in the province, nationally and internationally. Their report provides our government and the Government of Canada, along with regulators, law enforcement agencies, and businesses, with a comprehensive, ambitious yet realistic roadmap to continue and coordinate our work fighting money laundering in British Columbia and Canada. Our government asked the Commissioner to look into the problem of money laundering and tell us how big a problem it really is. Was this just a matter of a failed federal prosecution concerning one rogue money laundering business? Had the province functionally eliminated the issue in casinos? Or was this, as I and many suspected, a problem that crossed sectors, had national and international links, and required sustained, multi-year and multi-pronged responses? The Commissioner's response to this question is authoritative, complete, and disturbing. In this report, the Commissioner has advised all British Columbians and the Government of Canada that the volume of money laundering in our province is, quote, enormous, unquote. On reading this report, it is clear that the Commissioner's overriding conclusion in this regard is well grounded in testimony from police, experts in the field, and direct primary research. This important conclusion and the Commission's connection of money laundering in our province to violent crime and the illicit and poison drug trade underlines the reasons our government called this inquiry and the need for further efforts from all governments, regulators, and businesses. I noted with appreciation the Commission's findings, approving and supporting my own actions when I was responsible for the gambling file. And I'm glad to hear that after extensive review and challenge by various parties that the Commission has confirmed my understanding that there was a serious and decade-long continuing problem of organized crime laundering hundreds of millions of dollars in BC casinos at the time I took over the gaming file. The Commission also confirmed that it was the work of our government in 2017 that revealed the extent of this problem for the public and ended this criminality in relation to casinos after a decade of insufficient action. At this point, I would like to explicitly recognize the important role of members of the media in uncovering this issue for years before my time in the role as Minister responsible for gaming, and for years after, including during the pendency of this Commission of Inquiry. Many reporters also worked with and were supported by interested citizen advocates who should also be recognized. This number of dedicated reporters, both current and retired, you and I both know who you are, have spent extended amounts of time pulling at the threads that were available on the issue of money laundering, trying to get a sense for the public of the scope of the problem, and trying to ensure accountability and reform without any of the tools the inquiry had to demand records, compel testimony, and investigate. Despite that, you exposed much of what was confirmed by the Commission's work. Without your efforts, I do not believe that this inquiry would have taken place. It was called in response to widespread public concern about this issue, and your work contributed to public education. The conclusions of the Commissioner after years of study are a vindication of you and your work, your motivations for taking it on, and the influence that investigative reporting can have on government priorities and reform. Congratulations for your efforts, and I look forward to you holding me, our government, and those who come after me accountable to these recommendations and this critically important issue for all British Columbians and Canadians. Personally, I will never, ever forget my first briefing by the Gaming Policy Enforcement Branch, and I remain grateful to this day for their frank assessment of the problem. I believe it is immoral for government to receive the proceeds of crime in a way that benefits the budget's bottom line and supports that activity. I acted accordingly. I had the support of the Premier and the then Finance Minister in doing so, and I am honored that the Commission agreed with my understandings and concluded that the actions I took, with the support of Dr. Peter German, had the desired outcomes. I thank Dr. German for his work, taken under short timelines with high expectations and scrutiny, for assisting me with grappling with this issue in a way that would result in these positive conclusions from the Commissioner many years later. Our government has continued work on anti-money laundering measures based on previous reports, and much of this work overlaps with the Commission's current recommendations. We have not been waiting for the Commission to conclude. With that noted, I am excited about the potential of these new recommendations to help us attack gang crime, the illicit toxic drug trade, human trafficking, and other evils associated with money laundering in new and aggressive ways, going at the core that motivates, for example, vulnerable young people to consider getting involved in criminal lifestyles, the money, the luxury goods, the cars, and the properties. I'm appreciative of the Government of Canada's participation in this inquiry. I know that some of the findings of the Commission will be challenging for my federal colleagues. They will be, I'm sure, as I am, disappointed by the Commissioner's conclusions about the failures at FINTRAC, the ineffectiveness of federal enforcement responses related to money service businesses, the collapse of the federal working group announced in 2018 related to trade-based money laundering, the inadequacy of federal policing dedicated to this issue after literally a decade of public concern about this crime, and on and on and on. There was a reason the federal government wanted to participate in this inquiry with us, as I understood it. Like me, like my colleagues in government, I assume and understand that my federal colleagues saw the collapse of the Federal Prosecution Service's largest anti-money laundering prosecution in Canadian history as the symptom of an underlying serious and ongoing problem. Also, like me and like our government, I believe that they wanted to know what more could be done. Thank you to this Commission. We have those answers now. And I hope and expect that the new federal minister with responsibility for this file, Minister Mendicino, and the federal cabinet support in this important cooperative work. With that said, I agree with the Commissioner's implicit, unstated conclusion that the province can no longer rely on or wait for federal responses to address this problem, and we must take on a stronger role related to enforcement around previously exclusively federal responsibilities. For example, the regulation of money service businesses, the requirement of collection of money laundering data from sectors of the economy that should have been on FINTRAC's mandatory reporting list, like the luxury goods sector, and oversight of the export of grey market vehicles. I am enthusiastic about this comprehensive work by the Commissioner and believe these recommendations will help us to transform the meaning of the Vancouver model from a description of unchecked, dirty money moving through our casinos to a model of governments responding forcefully to the threat of money laundering. I look forward to working on these reforms with my colleagues both inside and outside government, with regulators and businesses provincially, with other provinces, with the federal government, and with all British Columbians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for bearing with us for the audio issues today. I would invite any media who have questions here in the room, please come up, line up behind me at the microphone. For anybody on the phone line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You will be limited to one question and one follow-up. Our first question today is coming from the room. We have Jeremy Nettle, The Star. Jeremy, please go ahead.
Hello, Minister Eby. I'm curious, the idea of setting up a provincial task force to sort of, I guess, pick up the pieces where the federal FINTRAC has failed, does that sort of signify that you've given up on the federal government being able to try to tackle this, or do you think that it's still possible to have FINTRAC strengthened?
I think it's impossible to read this report without coming to two understandings. One is that the support that we hoped for from federal enforcement bodies has not been there in British Columbia. There are many reasons for it, but what we relied on and hoped for was not realized. The second is that Even recent announcements from the federal government, for example, in cracking down on trade-based money laundering, have already essentially collapsed. And with those two conclusions, that the measures that we thought were there are not working, the measures that have been announced have not been successfully implemented, it's hard not to reach the conclusion that the Commissioner clearly did, that the province needs to assume responsibilities that previously the federal government would have done. For example, the federal government regulates money service businesses. You need to get a special license from the federal government to operate a money service business. One of the money service businesses that was licensed was one that was under active criminal investigation. It's a finding in the Commissioner's report. Clearly, that system's not working, and so the Commissioner has recommended the province take over the licensing and oversight of money service businesses. So in short, I would say this report confirms our understanding provincially that we need to do more that previously would have been federal government responsibility. And secondly, I hope that, given the federal government's participation in this, this really animates better their response, that they're more enthusiastic, provide more concerted attention to this issue in British Columbia.
When do you imagine you'll be able to start speaking with Minister Mendicino about this?
Because of the restrictions of our Public Inquiry Act, the federal government was only able to receive a copy of this report this morning. The minister and his staff and the federal government will need some time to digest both this very lengthy report and its recommendations. And once they're prepared, I look forward to working with them. Certainly our government does across ministries to address this, and I hope they take up the challenge. Thanks.
Our next question comes from Frank Chi, Omni News.
Thanks.
Minister, when you were still MLA, you released a report pointing fingers at money laundering and the specific Chinese-Canadian community for driving up property price in Vancouver, and the report did not come to that conclusion. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I disagree with your characterization of my work in opposition as well as the Commission's reports, Frank. A couple pieces. In opposition, I issued a document called Red Flags of Money Laundering in the Real Estate Sector, pointing to specific cases of people using things like bank drafts of sourced from criminal activity to purchase real estate, for example. And these are, despite the fact that that work was done almost a decade ago, many of those red flags that I identified at that time find confirmation in the Commissioner's report around vulnerabilities in the real estate market. I have repeated many, many times that money laundering is not the issue of one community in this province from the very beginning of my work on this issue. And the Commissioner repeats that as well. But the real estate sector, in multiple chapters in this report, is identified as particularly vulnerable. Everything from how developers source their capital, the activities of real estate agents, the activities of accountants and lawyers, all related to the real estate sector. The Commissioner was unable to conclude that money laundering is increasing the pricing of housing in our market right now, but he certainly does not reach the conclusion that it is not an issue.
And the follow-up about there is lack of recognition about international cooperation because it was federal jurisdiction. So you mentioned about you're going to talk with Minister Mendicino. How are you going to propose on that? Because there were a lot of findings in the report about this is about international organized crime, but there is no recommendation because it's federal jurisdiction.
I'm incredibly grateful for the Commissioner taking on this challenge. And the challenge is an area that has clear areas of federal accountability and responsibility. Yet we're a province, and the Commissioner was asked to do this by the provincial government. So there were lines, constitutional lines, that the Commissioner was unable to cross. And yet, despite that, the Commissioner was able to provide some very useful findings for the federal government, for the government of BC, as well as some really helpful recommendations about what we can do in BC. And I'll point you to specifically the recommendations of the unexplained wealth orders, where the government of BC, the Commissioner has recommended, could, with judicial oversight, ask people to explain the source of their money when they appear to be connected to criminality or to issues of corruption. And if they are unable to explain it, as they do in other jurisdictions, that property could be seized. This is a very important tool, a remarkable insight in terms of what's possible for us at the provincial level, including a supporting opinion from a former Supreme Court of Canada justice that such activity would in fact be constitutional. So it's recommendations like that. They certainly give me hope that despite the Commissioner saying this is an enormous problem, that we will be able to deploy new ways of going after it.
Our next question from the room is Amelia Macower, CBC Radio-Canada.
Good afternoon, Minister. I was wondering, what was your reaction regarding the portion in the report that says there was no corruption found in the previous government? I'm talking specifically about Prime Minister Christy Clark and Mr. Coleman. It said that there was no corruption because there was no personal gain or found in whatever. So I wanted to have your reaction on that.
Sure. I don't know what the reaction of former legislative members and current legislative members are to the Commissioner's findings, but I'm certainly appreciative of the Commissioner's consideration of my own response to the information I was presented. I'll say frankly that as a politician, I wouldn't be satisfied with a sash awarded by the Commissioner that says not corrupt. I hold myself to a higher standard, and I look forward to seeing what explanations, if any, people who the Commissioner has been critical of at the political level have to provide to British Columbians about why they failed at the job that British Columbians sent them to do.
And so far, is there any recommendations that you think you will be implementing?
Very enthusiastic about all of the Commissioner's recommendations. We have some work that has been underway in areas that the Commissioner has also identified. And some of the recommendations actually that the Commissioner's made have already been implemented in reforms we made to the Gaming Control Act in 2018. So I'm very much looking forward to working with my colleagues in finance, public safety on implementation. I think they have the potential to make a real difference.
Our next question comes from Graham Wood, Glacier Media.
Hey, David. The report talks about willful failure, but it's hard. I mean, we haven't read everything, but it's difficult to determine what the motive of that was. What do you think the motive was in terms of the bureaucrats and the politicians who willfully failed to tackle this issue?
I think that's an important question for those individuals who are identified by the Commissioner. What I can say is there's one public servant who's named in the report that I would like to specifically identify, who I worked with for a number of years on this file, Doug Scott. Doug was singled out by the Commissioner he was new to the public service. He was overly cooperative with the BC Lottery Corporation, according to the Commissioner, and should have been more aggressive with them. I would like to put on the record, having worked with Doug, that he was the architect of our government's response to the issue of money laundering in the casinos in terms of implementing Dr. German's recommendations. I find him to be a public servant of the highest integrity, and I'm very grateful for his response. I also want to recognize that my initial briefing from the Gaming Policy Enforcement Branch that showed me the videos of what was happening in BC casinos, videos that I shared with British Columbians, was led by a number of Gaming Policy Enforcement Branch staff that had key roles during this period. So I think it's a complicated issue around the public service. But I will say one of the questions we did ask the Commissioner is, how did we get here? How did we get to a stage where, as a new minister, I was sat down by the regulator and told we had a large-scale international money laundering problem in our casinos, and that had been going on for a decade? And that accountability is important. The Commissioner has made important findings about that. I think the politicians in particular, who have been identified as having key roles at the time, I hope they have some explanations for British Columbians. But the key piece of the report for me is the roadmap that's been set out about how we move forward and how we're going to be able to address this.
Yeah. I guess I got one more question. I get, corruption, the definition of corruption, it seems as though we need to prove that there was, a handing off of bags of cash, but what what is your definition of corruption, and the bonuses that the bureaucrats got, the political donations, the coffers that were padded through all this gambling, does that constitute a sort of motive of corruption?
In my opinion, the government of British Columbia should not knowingly be accepting the proceeds of crime as revenue in a way that supports that criminal activity. And that is something that happened for a decade that was insufficiently addressed. And those who are responsible for the decisions that led us to that point should definitely, in my opinion, explain how we got there. In terms of the definition of their own personal gain as being the measure of whether or not they did their jobs, I'll leave that to them to decide and British Columbians to decide. But I know for myself, I wouldn't be satisfied with the commissioner saying, well, at least he wasn't corrupt. I hold myself to a higher standard, and I hope all politicians do.
Next, we go to the phone lines. First up, we'll hear from Richard Zussman, Global News. Richard, please go ahead.
Minister, just to that point you were making there, it is your opinion, many of the things that you have done over the last few years, before you were a minister, even while you were a minister, starts to point towards your belief that this previous government was corrupt. And Commissioner Cullen writes, to the extent that some have hypothesized that money laundering in casinos was facilitated by corrupt politicians or officials, they are engaging in conjecture that is not rooted in evidence. Are you not just engaging in conjecture even through your last answer to Graham's question?
I'm not sure what I said there, Richard, that would lead you to that place. My opinion is, when I was presented with the exact same information that my predecessor had, I approached it very differently. I had the support of the Premier and the Minister of Finance to implement Dr. German's key recommendation, which was to refuse to accept bulk cash and drafts that were unsourced. And I am grateful for the Commissioner's finding that ended a problem that had been in BC casinos for the better part of a decade. And I am encouraged by that finding, and I am proud of that finding. And I simply raised the question about whether, for the people who held my office before me as the minister responsible for gaming, can say the same.
Richard, do you have a follow-up?
One of the big issues, even with announcing this inquiry, was around accountability. I know there were concerns from yourself and the Premier about what the goals are here. Do you believe, after 3+ years, that the right people have been held accountable, or do you believe it largely will be the public's interpretation of this that will lead to the accountability piece?
No, I don't believe the right people have been held accountable. I believe the Commissioner's finding that money laundering is an enormous problem in our province. The reason, in large part, for calling the inquiry was the collapse of a federal prosecution that, in my opinion, was a critically important case about a money service business in our province that was alleged to have laundered hundreds of millions of dollars. Because that case didn't go ahead, because we still have a almost complete gap in terms of enforcement around money laundering, the people who are money laundering are not being held accountable. And this inquiry is about how we solve that problem. In terms of political accountability, many of the people who previously held the offices that I held are no longer in government. And that is a form of accountability. And in terms of my role as Attorney General, given broad public concern about issues of corruption, it is important to confirm that there is not corruption within either the public service or government. And so these are important questions to ask.
Our next question from the phones comes from Justine Hunter, Globe and Mail.
Hi, thanks. Minister, you said it's impossible possible to read this report without reaching the conclusion that the federal support was not there in British Columbia. I'm wondering if you could just articulate what you think the main reasons for that is.
Well, I remember having a conversation with a senior federal official about the trade-based money laundering initiative, that this was a big focus of the federal governments, and that although the public was concerned about retail-level money laundering at casinos, that trade-based money laundering was a much bigger issue, and that's why they were going after it. So to read in this report that the working group on trade-based money laundering has essentially collapsed due to reasons that are inexplicable to me. Apparently the key person is no longer with the RCMP, was the explanation that was provided to the Commissioner, is an indication that this is not receiving priority attention from the federal government. And there's a new minister on the file. I think there's a chance to restart this relationship. I think that the report, frankly, is an indictment of failures around the federal anti-money laundering regime and a call for reform, even within this provincial look that didn't have the authority to even receive, as you'll note when you read it, fully unredacted FinTrack reports. I hope that this report is a reset for us with the federal government, that we're able to recommence this fight, because the province will do everything we can, including taking areas of responsibility that are clearly the federal government's, to get this done. But we can do a much better job if we work together.
Justine, do you have a follow-up?
I do, thanks. I'm just wondering if you could sort of explain how would BC assume responsibility for something that is currently federal jurisdiction, so a BC police unit dedicated to this. Is there a model for that anywhere else in BC or elsewhere in Canada? And what does it look like?
So constitutionally, we can have overlapping provincial licensing and regulatory authorities in a number of areas, and one of them that I'll point to in the report that the Commissioner identified for us is in relation to money service businesses. Although this is an area where the feds do have a licensing program, the Commissioner found it's not working, to the point that money service business under active criminal investigation was granted one of these licenses. The province can impose its own licensing and oversight regime on these businesses. And the Commission's report finds a number of areas like this where we can overlap and complement federal regulatory systems that are not working for our province.
Our next question comes from Rob Shaw, Check News.
Hi, Minister. You did sort of cut off for us in the beginning, so you may have already addressed this, but are you committing to accepting all of the 101 recommendations that apply to the province and implementing them all as written by the Commissioner? And if so, how long do you think that's going to take?
So I'm really enthusiastic about the Commissioner's recommendations. I think there are some that can make a significant difference in our fight against criminality and money laundering in our province. And I'm very enthusiastic about his willingness to explore ways that the province can extend our reach into areas where the current federal system is letting us down. And so I'll be working with my colleagues on implementation with the Peter German report. We are almost entirely implemented all of the recommendations that Dr. German made to us. A number of times we had to go back to Dr. German, clarify his intent and explain some departures from those recommendations and get his support for that. I anticipate that there will be similar issues with the Commission's recommendations as we get into implementation. But at this stage, government is committed to taking the recommendations from the Commissioner and implementing them.
Sure. On the BC Lottery Corporation, there is kind of a scathing repeated reference to it and the way that it advised ministers in the past that there was really nothing wrong here, and contradicting GPEB and other experts who were saying actually there are concerns. And I wondered, the BC Lottery Corporation as it exists today, has it been held structure and leadership and executive team and officials that are still in place there? And are you planning on doing anything about the Lottery Corporation in the wake of some kind of disturbing, findings against it?
there has been a complete turnover of the executive team and the board at the BC Lottery Corporation from the time studied by the Commissioner, the pre-2017 period.
Next question from the phones comes from Andrew McLeod, the Tyee. Andrew, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, David. Just specifically on some of those recommendations, I know you said you're enthusiastic about them, but one of them was for an independent officer of the legislature as an anti-money laundering commissioner. Is that going to happen, and when?
So the timing on any recommendations and implementation is difficult to say on week one of having this report in hand. There's a lot of policy work to do. But what I can say is that I'm certainly enthusiastic about these recommendations. I understand why the Commissioner has made that recommendation. The issue of money laundering is an ongoing one that can fade from public consciousness, and when attention wanes, as the Commissioner has found, the activity can really accelerate in a hurry. And so he wants sustained attention on that. So I look forward to working with my colleagues and with the Commissioner on implementation to achieve those goals.
Andrew, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, sure. You said you'd been moving on the Peter German recommendations already. If I'm remembering correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, he had recommended creating a new Crown Corporation to regulate casinos. Is that coming?
In the 2018 gaming control regulation changes, we implemented a number of Dr. German's recommendations, and in fact some that are in Commissioner Cullen's report today around, for example, the Gaming Policy Enforcement Branch's ability to direct BC Lottery Corporation to take certain steps. We still have some additional steps that require further legislation in terms of implementing Dr. German's recommendations, and that policy work is ongoing, and we will deliver those recommendations as well.
A couple of more questions to go on the phone. The penultimate question, Bob Mackin, Breaker News. Bob, please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. The inspiration for this commission was the Charbonneau Commission. You hosted a speech by Sonia Labelle, the Charbonneau Commission Council, back in 2017. The Charbonneau Commission lasted for 4 years. The Cullen Commission lasted only 3 years. It did not have testimony from municipal politicians or staff or real estate developers. Why did you not let the commission continue for another year? I mean, cost can't be an issue because the Premier found $1 billion for the museum. So why didn't you let this commission go for another year to make it 4 years?
I had some very specific questions, as government did, and as British Columbians did, that we wanted the Commission to answer. The Commission operated independent of government and received extensions of time as well as extensions of budget to deliver. I think they were challenged by COVID and impacts of COVID that caused some of the extensions, but others related to simply the volume of material that they received and the delay in receiving some material from various actors. The Commissioner took the time that he needed without pressure from government to deliver this, and I'm glad he did so. The Commission deliberately was set up as independent from me and independent from government in terms of doing this work. And I heard the Commissioner during the Commissioner's remarks, as well as his council, talking about their prioritization, where they focused on areas of risk, and those decisions were all made independent of government.
Follow up, Bob?
Yeah, both Commissioner Cullen and you made special note of the important role of the media in shining a light on money laundering. That's a nice sentiment, and we all feel good to hear those words, but your words don't really match your actions. It's right here in Hansard, November 25th of 2021, you voted for Bill 22, which watered down the Freedom of Information law and allowed the NDP to charge a $10 tax on FOI requests. Will you consider excusing reporters from paying the $10 FOI application fee?
There are some really specific recommendations from the Commissioner around public access to various databases that assist in uncovering and identifying money laundering. Those recommendations will be looked at by government. In terms of the specific FOI issue, my colleague Lisa Baer has presented extensive information about why government took those steps, including the remarkable escalation in cost to the public of processing FOI requests. And that is not canvassed by the Commissioner or the Commissioner's recommendations.
Our last question today comes from Mary Brooke, Island Social Trends.
Hi, thanks for taking our questions today. So you've mentioned that you would hold politicians to a higher standard than what was evidently happening before. Will you be approaching the former politicians for their comments or waiting for them to come forward?
So I hold myself to a higher standard than being awarded the sash of not corrupt. I'm proud of my actions that I took on this file. I am glad for the Commission's findings about the impact that those actions have had on the issue in our casinos. And I recognize and commit to prioritizing acting on the Commissioner's recommendations, how we move forward to deal with what he describes as an enormous problem. It is not going to be my job to pursue these individuals, many of whom are no longer in politics, to get their explanation, but for their own legacies, they may choose to explain why they did what they did.
Follow-up, Mary?
Yeah, so the BC Lottery Corporation essentially stood by and permitted what was seen to be suspicious or obvious behavior. And as was stated by the Commissioner, there seemed to be a counter-narrative even in internal communications as to what was really going on. So you've just said today that the former executive and board has moved on, but will there be any changes asked of BCLC now as a result of this report?
There have been significant internal process changes at the BC Lottery Corporation, as well as personnel changes to respond to this issue, and I have great confidence, as it appears does the Commissioner, that BCLC is in a better place today.
Thank you, everyone, for today. That concludes today's availability.